Welcome back to DRS Dispatch and welcome back to This Week in Formula One. This week is the week of the 9th of March 2026 and it is the week of the Chinese Grand Prix. So today I'll be going over the news and everything that you need to know going into the Chinese Grand Prix, including my thoughts on the results of the Australian Grand Prix. So let's get right into it. So let's start off with everything that went on in the 2026 Australian Grand Prix. Now, I attended the Australian Grand Prix in person this year, and I'll have a video up later this week about my experience and everything that went on there. But for now, before that video comes out, let's just review and go over everything that happened in the Australian Grand Prix and how I felt about it. So starting off with the results, Mercedes, of course, kicked off the year with a very, very positive 1-2 result for them. And certainly the Mercedes definitely dominated a lot in this Grand Prix, though I think Ferrari also looked very strong, so yeah. But let's start off with Mercedes. Not so perfect start, I would say. Well, as per usual, once again, thank you to the Formula One official website for this article before we get into it. Mercedes, of course, dominated qualifying over the course of the weekend, with the moment of where Toto turned and smiled to the camera, kind of being symbolic of Mercedes' sheer dominance that they had during the weekend. And they were definitely a force to be reckoned with. I think in FP3, the Mercedes was like nearly a second faster than anybody else. So yeah, they managed to lock in the front row with a sizable margin, which is extremely impressive and definitely shows a lot of confidence in the Merc that I think a lot of people were expecting, and definitely points out that they were sandbagging a lot, which I am not surprised by, personally. The Ferraris also got off to a good start, with both of them not too far behind. I think Charles was P4. But yeah, let's get into the actual start of the race, where Charles absolutely shot off the line to snatch the early lead from P4, which was insanely impressive and not at all surprising to see, because the Ferraris have been strong off the start throughout the course of testing as well. And Lewis was able to also snatch up a sizable amount of points, though Kimi Antonelli did get a really bad start, with it being, I think it was later confirmed that he had wheel spin at the start of the race and his battery wasn't fully charged, which definitely helped Leclerc in the long run, though that start was unbelievably impressive. So yeah, over the course of the next kind of 20 or so laps, the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc and the Merc of George Russell were kind of tossing and tussling for about 20 laps until Isaac Hadjar had a mechanical problem. This led to the Mercedes both diving into the pits, with the Ferrari ultimately deciding to stay out, which proved to be the wrong strategic decision in the long run. The Merc was then able to jump them after the Ferraris went into the pits later in the race, and the Merc didn't pit again after that, though it was an absolutely electrifying start, and if we can continue to get more racing like that, I think it's going to be an extremely entertaining season. It's just a shame that Ferrari decided not to pit. But ultimately, I don't think that was the wrong decision, because one would have thought in any other season that the Merc would have had to pit again. They just didn't. So yeah, I've talked about Ferrari's encouraging performance. It seems like Ferrari is definitely the second best team right now. Though there is definitely a little bit of performance to be gained there. As Hamilton spoke out, saying that he's in the best place he's been in a long time. So it's extremely encouraging for Ferrari and for Leclerc and for Lewis. And so yeah, obviously we also need to talk about Oscar Piastri's shock pre-race exit, where he spun out and hit the barrier before the race even began. Being at the actual event, it was absolutely shocking to see. Everybody was kind of stunned into silence. But yeah, McLaren didn't really have the best of weekends, with Lando not being able to capitalize, though he did end up 5th, and Oscar Piastri not really, obviously not even starting the race. So it was kind of a big shame for the McLaren team there. And it was, as an Australian fan and a Melburnian, it was extremely harrowing to see, to be honest, and quite sad. But these things happen. Fortunately, he was okay, and it was a massive shame. So yeah, it just seemed like Oscar had more power than he would have thought he did in that moment, and got some wheel spin, and then bang, that was it. So yeah, Verstappen also had an absolute cracker of a Grand Prix, going from P20 all the way to P6, I think, by the end of the race, which is, you know, classic Max Verstappen kind of stuff. So it wasn't really very surprising to me, though it was still a cracker of a race, absolutely. Hadjar, unfortunately, was not able to finish the race after starting P3, which is extremely disappointing, but also extremely encouraging, I think. Encouraging for that Red Bull and for Hadjar. So hopefully Hadjar continues up the good performance in that Red Bull P2, though Max was somewhat unhappy, I think, about the result ultimately at the end of the race and in post-race interviews. But yeah, who's to say if Isaac had stayed in the race and had been able to finish where he would have ended up? Who knows? Who knows? Arvid Lindblad also had an absolute cracker of a Grand Prix, ending within the top 10 in his debut race. But I think outperforming Liam Lawson as well, which is extremely impressive for the British driver. And certainly I think there's a lot of promise in Lindblad there, and I hope he continues to go well. So extremely impressive start for Lindblad and for Racing Bulls. And yeah, shout out Lindblad. The Audis also had an absolute cracker of a Grand Prix. But Nico Hülkenberg unfortunately suffered some issues on his way to the grid, but Gabriel Bortoleto was able to finish in P10, I think, around there. So yeah, extremely impressive for Audi and for Lindblad on their debut Grand Prix. It's insanely impressive, so hopefully they continue to go well throughout the remainder of the season. Cadillac, on the other hand, was only able to finish with Sergio Perez. Unfortunately, Valtteri Bottas suffering some problems later in the race, but yeah. But I still think it's impressive that Cadillac was able to have an entirely faultless race. Aston Martin, on the other hand, I don't think either of their cars finished, if I'm mistaken. I might be, but we'll take a look in a second. So yeah, Perez finishing the races, as he says here, the best result they could have aimed for. So I think it's also an extremely impressive start for Cadillac. So all that being said and done, that was pretty much the Australian Grand Prix. It started off really well, but unfortunately ended up being a little bit of a boring race. And as a whole, I would probably give the race a 5 out of 10. It was entertaining enough, but definitely nowhere near as good as last year's Australian Grand Prix. That was a cracker of a race. But certainly some promising signs to come. And in terms of being the first race of the new regulations, I think all the teams should be very proud of themselves and all of the engineers and all the hard work they put in to get it running, as we had a pretty good Grand Prix, and that's all we can ask for. So let's look at the final results here. Starting off with George Russell and Kimi Antonelli in P1 and 2 respectively, followed by Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, Max Verstappen, Oliver Behrman, Arvid Lindblad in P8, Gabriel Bortoleto in P9, and Pierre Gasly in P10, rounding out the top 10. We were then followed by Esteban Ocon, Alexander Albon, Liam Lawson, Franco Colapinto, Carlos Sainz, Sergio Perez, Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso, and then Lance Stroll, Fernando Alonso were not finished, DNFs, along with Valtteri Bottas, Isaac Hadjar, Oscar Piastri, and Nico Hülkenberg, respectively. So yeah, overall 17 finishes total, and really great results for the Merc, for the Ferrari, and for the Red Bull. And lots of promising results there, so hopefully they will continue to go well going into the Chinese Grand Prix. So let's talk about the news. I want to start off really quickly talking about Valtteri Bottas's penalty points. I saw some confusion online about this, and it was later clarified Valtteri Bottas was supposed to suffer, I think, a 3-place grid drop due to what happened at the end of 2024 in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Though ultimately this was rescinded, and that's why he didn't suffer that. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to talk about there. Let's talk about Max Verstappen. This just got announced 15 hours ago today, which is Max Verstappen making his debut in a Merc-branded Red Bull, which is interesting, in the Nürburgring 24 Hours race. Considering what he did last year with the endurance race that he did, it's not all that surprising to me. In my opinion, this kind of is signaling the start of Max's interest in racing outside of Formula 1, and almost kind of the end of his tenure in Formula 1. Of course, not just yet, I believe. I don't believe it'll be probably not until the end of next year or the year after that. But yeah, Max competing in the Nürburgring, I think, is one of the first kind of steps that he's taking outside of Formula 1 now. He's obviously also expressed interest in Le Mans 24 Hours, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, I hope he goes well. I have no doubt he will. Interesting that he's driving in a Merc branded Red Bull, or a Merc that has been branded with Red Bull kind of stuff. And yeah, Nürburgring's an interesting track, so I hope that he goes well. Next and last story for this episode, F1 is reportedly set to cancel the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. This came off the back of Isaac Hadjar and Kimi Antonelli joking on a flight which was overheard by a passenger, in which Isaac said something along the lines of that because they were missing both the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix as they had been cancelled, it was 2 less races for Kimi Antonelli to win, which I thought was quite funny personally. And so yeah, originally there was some questions around whether the Formula 1 was set to replace these Grand Prix with different races, including a second Australian Grand Prix, though it ultimately seems like that is not the case, unfortunately, there. And so yeah, I think it's a shame. Obviously that means there's not going to be any Formula 1 in April, which is interesting, and I'll be curious to see what Formula 1 decides to do. So yeah, that was all the stories and everything that happened in the Australian Grand Prix. Let's move over to finally discussing round 2 of the 2026 Formula 1 season. This is of course the Chinese Grand Prix, taking place as per usual in the Shanghai International Circuit from March the 13th to the 15th. This race will be a sprint weekend, the first of the 2026 season, which means we'll get 2 races this weekend. And yeah, Shanghai, similar to Melbourne, is a fast corner circuit, so that will most likely benefit the Merc over the Ferrari, as was seen in Melbourne. So I think we can expect probably another primarily Merc dominated weekend, though I'll be curious to see what happens there. So let's talk about the 2026 driver standings as of right now. Russell and Antonelli are the top 2, followed by Leclerc, Hamilton and Norris in P3, 4 and 5 respectively. This of course follows the race results for the top 10 in the 2026 Formula 1 Australian Grand Prix, so it's basically unchanged as of now, so not really much to talk about there. Let's also talk about the qualifying head-to-head with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. With Oscar Piastri out-qualifying Lando Norris in the first race, George Russell with Kimi Antonelli, Max Verstappen with Hadjar, Leclerc out-qualifying Hamilton, Albon out-qualifying Sainz, Lawson out-qualifying Lindblad, Alonso out-qualifying Stroll, Behrman out-qualifying Ocon, Bortoletto out-qualifying Hülkenberg, Pierre Gasly out-qualifying Franco Colapinto, and Bottas being out-qualified by Sergio Perez. So because we don't have much data as of right now, this is kind of what we're looking at. Certainly there's a large gap between Russell and Antonelli, which is not all that surprising considering how dominant Russell looked. There's also a very significant gap between Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad, which is interesting to me, with Liam Lawson out-qualifying Lindblad by a solid amount right there, and the rest of them are kind of average. Pierre Gasly also, as per usual, out-qualified Colapinto by a lot, with Bottas also out-qualifying, or being out-qualified by Checo by half a second. So it's kind of hard to gauge exactly what any of this means as of right now, but that's pretty much that. So let's now get into my predictions for the 2026 Chinese Grand Prix. We'll start off with my big 3, which is rescinded from my big 4. Originally I had McLaren added to here, but I've kind of removed them from the picture for now, and in my opinion this is kind of your current big 3. But let's start with my predictions. I have predicted that the sprint winner will be Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton, of course, won the Chinese Grand Prix last year. And I think due to Ferrari's kind of aptitude to go well off the start, I think Ferrari will take an early lead in the sprint and then ultimately win because there's not as many laps in a sprint race. And I can see Lewis Hamilton coming off the back of last year's sprint race also being somewhat good there. So yeah, Lewis Hamilton is my prediction for the sprint winner. The race winner, on the other hand, I'm predicting that Kimi Antonelli will take the win this time around. You could definitely throw George Russell up there, as my prediction last week was George Russell, which ended up coming true. But overall, I think the race winner will be Kimi, because I think it would be really cool. That's kind of my main motivation. I'd love to see Kimi take a win, and I think Kimi will here. And of course, I think the winning team will ultimately be Mercedes, which I think comes as no surprise overall. So that is my predictions for the Chinese Grand Prix. So with all that being said and done, that was this week in Formula One. Make sure to tune in for the Chinese Grand Prix later in the week, and I'll be going over everything that happened there in next week's This Week in Formula One, so stay tuned for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you have a great, wonderful day. If there's anything I missed, leave it in the comment section below, and make sure to like and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. And I'll see you all later this week. So thank you. Have a great, wonderful day. Bye for now, guys.